we're going to be talking about transformations. And transformations are either translations, meaning it's moving a function left or right, so you're moving it horizontally, or vertically, up and down. We covered that before. The one that we're going to be covering right now are reflections. So let's look at an easy function. Let's look at y equals x cubed, and we know we can write it as a function in function notation. F of x equals x cubed. It will look something like this, passing through the origin and continues on. So this is our function. If we wanted to reflect this, we're going to reflect it about the x-axis. What would happen if we reflected it around the x-axis or across the x-axis? With this thing would be down here, and this piece would come up here. So I'm going to draw in red what would happen. We would have something basically like this. I'm going to draw it with a dashed line, so you kind of see what's happening. This piece would now be reflected across the x-axis, so it would come down like this. This piece would be reflected across the x-axis, so it would be going up like that. Now here is the real conundrum, is to look at this and say, how do we go from this function to that function? And there's a real easy answer. If you took any of these values, let's say here's an x value, I'm going to make one up. Let's put 5 here for x. Well, if we put this into the function, we have 5 times 5 times 5, and I'm going to cheat a little bit. This would be 125, and I know the axes are not really scaled correctly, but I'm just want to give you this as an example. Here's 5, here's 125. So this point would be 5 comma 125. This corresponding point down here would be still at 5, but it would be negative 125. So your y value just got a negative in front of it. Let's take this one right here. Let's say if we were out at negative 7. This piece, let's just make one up right here, would be negative 7 comma whatever, but it would be a positive number, right? So it would be a positive number right here. Whatever that corresponding one would be here would be still negative 7 comma a negative number. So basically this was our original piece, the negative. How do we make a negative into a positive? Take the negative of that negative. How did we get a positive to become a negative? Take the negative of that. So the function, this new function, becomes minus x cubed. And basically when you have a negative in front of the function that you had, it is just flipping it across the x-axis. So this gives you a reflection across the x-axis. Let's look at what would happen if we go back to our original function. Let me erase this. And let's try to go across the y-axis. Let's see what happens. If we went across the y-axis, the graph that we have right now would change and would almost be looking like what we did prior, because this piece would come around and this piece would come around over there. So what I want to do is let me change this graph to be a little bit different than what we had. let's go back to something pretty easy. Let's go back to something like from Algebra 1. Where if you had something like this, f of x, this is really the y or the f of x axis. So f of x equals 3x plus 5. You would know that that's a linear function that goes through 5 and continues on like this. And I'm not caring about where it's hitting down here. I'm just giving you a general idea. If we were to flip this, reflect it across the y-axis, this piece now would be here, and this piece would be there. So my question is, how do we move this thing over to there and this piece over to there? So what we need to do is to say, this would definitely be a negative slope. So you know right away that it has to be negative something, right? Negative, and whatever the m is, x, and it's still the same intercept, y-intercept. So if this thing is going up with a slope of 3, this one will turn out to be going downward and has a slope of negative 3. So really what you're doing is, instead of putting an x value in, what you're really doing is putting a negative x in. So what you're doing to get from here to here, you're taking f of x equals 3x plus 5, and really what you're doing is you're replacing x by negative x. So you would have 3 times negative x plus 5, which would then give you negative 3x plus 5. And now watch what happens. When you plug in your x value, when it was a positive, let's say a positive 2, you would be over here at 2 comma 11, right? And this now would give you a negative 2 comma 11. So all you're really doing is taking that number now, and when you plug it in here, the f of x and the f of negative x will be exactly the same value. The y values will be the same when you flip this